My wife came to me with a surprising request. She wanted to cheat on me. I was shocked and angry. How could she even think about doing something like that after 20 years of marriage? In that moment, I knew I had to take action. Looking back, I probably should have seen it coming. Life seemed too perfect, especially at that moment. It was a lovely Friday evening, and the air was warm and summery. On that day, I was enjoying a cold lager on the patio, watching the Cubs beat the Cardinals 7-2 in the fifth inning. My German shepherd, Hunter, was lying next to me, mostly asleep but occasionally waking up to cheer for the Cubs. Apart from the occasional excitement from the game, the house was peaceful. My wife, Grace, was visiting our neighbor, and our son was away at university. My son is 16, and my older daughter was staying with friends, so my daughter and Hunter and a case of beer were at their friends' houses. I'd grabbed a couple earlier in the day, intending to treat myself to a relaxing evening alone. I heard the front screen door creak open and shut, assuming it was my wife returning from her visit with her longtime friend April. Despite hearing movement in the front of the house, I noticed the absence of her usual greeting, which struck me as odd. However, my focus shifted when Cubs manager David Ross made a controversial decision. This made me really angry and also disturbed the dog. It took at least 7 minutes before Grace finally came into the family room. She looked like she was thinking about something, maybe feeling a bit anxious. Instead of coming over for a kiss, she sat on the edge of the sofa next to my chair and kept one eye on me while I was still watching the game. "Can we talk for a minute, Adam?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the television. Her words immediately got my full attention. I noticed a faint sheen of sweat on her forehead and observed, "Of course, Bundy." I noticed her breathing was irregular. I wondered if someone we knew was unwell or had passed away. "Could you turn off the TV?" she asked. I could tell from her clenching and unclenching her fist that this was important to her. Turning off the TV during a Cubs game meant it had to be serious. It could even be about death. I felt uneasy. I reached for the remote and turned off the TV. "What's wrong, honey?" "You don't seem well. Has someone passed away?" I asked. "Oh God, no, nobody has died," she responded quickly. "It's just that this is incredibly important to me and I need to ensure you're fully attentive." I nodded silently, my mind flooded with troubling thoughts as we locked eyes. For what felt like an eternity, I could sense fear in her gaze, along with something else, perhaps anger. "You know, I love you completely, and I would never betray you, never be unfaithful with another man." Her unexpected question caught me off guard. The dinner I had earlier in the evening and the 2 beers I drank during the game seemed to threaten to reset this right. Then and there on the family room floor, I nodded once more. "I'm 44, Adam. Besides you, I've only been with one other man in my entire life," she began. I still turn heads. My friends even call me a hot mill. I want to be with another man just once to experience the excitement of I needed to experience something new and different before we grow old together. I remained motionless, unable to discern how long it had been. It felt like a rushing train was by my ears. "No, absolutely not," I shouted as I leaped from my seat. "This won't happen while I'm still breathing." She watched me with wide eyes. As I paced back and forth, I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. While she sat in the chair, I was in my own twisted dream, thinking about my personal needs that went beyond our family. The more I speak, the stronger I feel. I believe I've been a devoted wife and mother all these years. I've always put the family first, but now I need to do something for myself. I need to feel like a confident, desirable woman in control of my own life. "Do you not feel desirable with me?" I asked, realizing how pathetic I sounded. "I express my love for you constantly, and I believe I consistently make you feel desired. I still crave you, and I don't think I'm suffering from any lack of interest. You do, and I appreciate that, but this is about something else. My ego from men other than you, Adam. It's nice to be noticed by other men. It's exciting to imagine that another man desires me in that way, right? It makes you feel good when you catch a woman looking at you or flirting with you, doesn't it? I'm not unlike anyone else. I enjoy being looked at. After all this time, I want one thing more than anything: to go out on a date, have dinner and wine with a different man, and then be pursued and desired by him for one night. I want to experience that, and then I'd go home to you and be your devoted wife and mother for the rest of my days. You're more than just a devoted wife and mother to me. I count on you. You're my everything. I can't bear the thought of you being with another man. I refuse to let you go." "Why not? He keeps saying you love me." "Show me you care by giving me this. I know it's a lot to ask. It might even be the biggest ask of all, but it would mean a lot to me if you were to agree." She insisted no. It would be the ultimate foolishness for me to agree to that. "If you truly loved me, you wouldn't have even brought it up." I replied, "I've been a decent husband and father. Shouldn't that earn me some leeway? You've had more partners than I have. I'm just trying to level the playing field. We never discussed numbers before we got married. We got married and all we really talked about was our mutual belief in fidelity. I've only been intimate with 4 women in my life, including you, so it's not exactly a long list." I said, "I always assumed you had much more experience than me." She admitted, "You seem to know so much more than I do. I've done a lot of reading on the subject. I want to make you happy in every way I can." She said, "I'm still firmly against it. I'll be contacting the lawyer first, then on Monday morning to begin divorce proceedings." I said that I understood it must have been difficult for her to ask, which showed me that she was serious about it. That also showed me that she wouldn't give up easily. I said that it meant she might eventually try to do it. "I don't trust you not to do it unless you've already done so, and this could be just a way to seek permission after the fact. I swear I haven't been with anyone else. I promised I wouldn't cheat on you and I meant it," she pleaded. "But now that I know you want to, I don't know what to do. You might think it's not cheating since you've asked." I locked eyes with her, and her avoidance of eye contact conveyed everything I needed to know. "Are you really willing to tear apart our family even though I haven't done anything yet?" "You've had the courage to ask, which suggests you've been thinking about this for a while. It seems like you already have someone in mind. Maybe he's been involved in the planning of 2 lunches and dinners. Emotionally, you've already betrayed me." "Who is he?" I asked. I didn't have anyone. She said she had someone in mind, but she didn't say who. She was looking at a spot on the wall behind me. I looked at her for about 20 seconds, and she got really red in the face. She said, "You don't need to know, Adam." I said, "Technically I don't. I'm curious about the man who's dismantling what I thought was a strong marriage. He can tell me, or I can reach out to all your close friends, your boss, and every coworker." I threatened. She began, "Wouldn't you? What do I have left to lose? Life's already in a bit of a mess. My marriage is on the rocks. A little embarrassment hardly matters to me." "What about my embarrassment?" I shrugged, trying to hide my smile. "What's your name?" I inquired, my voice calm and collected. She replied softly, her voice trembling, "Please, Adam, don't hurt me. I'm not—" I made a promise and reached for the remote to resume the game. She huffed and got up from the couch, heading upstairs to our bedroom. I was glued to the Cubs game, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't recall what aired on TV afterwards, but I remained in front of the screen. Despite my best efforts to hide it, I was utterly devastated. I had no idea she was thinking about cheating on me. Looking back, I should have picked up on the signs of her discontent with me and our life together. Over the past 3 months, Grace had become increasingly distant, not only from me but also from our children. In fact, it was our daughter Nancy who first noticed it, asking if Grace and I had been in some sort of disagreement, as the closeness between us seemed to have diminished. I also noticed that we weren't having sex as often as we used to. It used to be 2 or 3 times a week, but it had decreased to once every other week, despite my efforts. I started to wonder if she was experiencing some early changes. There were also instances of her taking phone calls outside of the room, which was a new behavior, along with nearly constant late-night texting. When I asked her about it, she said it was because of April, who supposedly was dealing with issues in her marriage with Jack. This intrigued me, as Jack and April lived just 3 doors down from us. I had no idea they were having any problems over the weekend. I thought about what I could do. I told Grace I was going to start divorce proceedings quickly, but I needed to think about everything in my marriage and family. It was easy to see why other men were attracted to Grace. I first met her when we were both 20. Even at 44, she had only gained 1 pound despite having 2 children. She had a nice figure, with big breasts and a firm butt. She also looked young. She seemed closer to 35, I often wondered how I ended up with Grace, as she was clearly out of my league. Men like me don't typically end up with someone who was a prom queen just 3 years prior in high school. Our paths crossed in a physics class at university during our junior year. I was taking it for fun, while Grace needed it to fulfill her science requirement. I was more than willing to help her pass the class, as science wasn't her strong suit. By the end of the first semester, Drew had caught up. We were studying in my dorm room when Grace suddenly leaned in and kissed me passionately. I kissed her back just as passionately. "Dan, for most of the semester, I thought you were gay," Grace said after we broke the kiss. "No matter what I did, you never seemed interested." I replied, "I was definitely interested, but I had no clue it was mutual. I was just trying my best not to drool over you." We immediately entered into an exclusive relationship. My experience in bed was limited, but it seemed to be even more important to her as she never complained and seemed. I did a lot of reading on the subject, and I'm grateful for that. While my colleagues were watching adult films, I studied the depicted actions. This proved useful to Grace from the very beginning. During our second intimate encounter, I managed to make her pass out with a language technique. When she regained consciousness 3 minutes later, all she could say was, "I love you, Adam." 2.5 years after graduation, we were married. 3.5 years later, our son was born. Then our daughter was born. Financially, we were doing well. I worked in it, and she was When she came back to work, after our youngest started school, our son was getting ready to start his freshman year at Ohio State in a couple of months, while our daughter was about to enter her senior year of high school in just 2 years. We'd be empty nesters in no time. We'd been talking about our future plans, including travel, for the past few months. I'd loved this woman for nearly 24 years. On the one hand, ending it all because she wanted to cheat seemed harsh, but on the other hand, her reaching the point of asking was a big issue. I wasn't. I knew she was desperate enough to ask for permission to cheat, that she might do it behind my back. She told me about it and didn't think it was cheating, but I did. There was also the issue of her already having an emotional affair with Larry Hayes and planning this act of physical infidelity together. Could I ever forgive her? I called a divorce attorney on Monday morning and made an appointment for Thursday afternoon. Grace tried to convince me not to file for divorce. "We haven't done anything, Adam. We won't." Grace peed. "Is it because you genuinely don't want a divorce, or because you know it's wrong?" I asked. She avoided eye contact and remained silent. "You're still hoping I'll change my mind and allow it, aren't you?" Our hopeful expression sadly confirmed it. As it turned out, Grace was served with divorce papers a week after meeting with my attorney. We lived in a no-fault state and had similar incomes, so we made the financial aspects of the divorce simple. We also made plans for our nearly grown children gradually, with a non-custodial parent responsible for child support for a year. The plan was for the parent with custody to be responsible for child support for a year. We were going to sell the house and divide the proceeds and then wrap up our 20-year marriage. After a year of marriage, things didn't go as smoothly as we'd hoped. Grace had a lawyer who convinced the judge to order 4 counseling sessions, with the option of more if needed. The counselor was a woman in her mid-30s. My kids and Grace were in their 32nds and saw things the same way. If my wife hadn't cheated, why did I want a divorce? I told the counselor what I'd told Grace and my kids. I saw her having an affair as breaking our marriage vows. I couldn't trust her again, even though I still loved her. I'd never go through that again. "Adam, I only need you. Please." Throughout the majority of after 2 sessions, she kept asking if he was set on his decision. She said he was convinced and seemed relaxed. At the end of the second session, the counselor said he should stop wasting time and let the judge proceed with a divorce. Griffin said he'd keep his personal opinion to himself, but he thought it was a mistake. He said his wife hadn't been unfaithful, so marriage counseling could help. "Your wife seems willing to make any concessions necessary to save your marriage and your family." Dr. D said I admitted, grimacing, that I had a strong bond with Grace. I didn't make this decision lightly. "Dr. D, there's a difference in our views. You called it a concession, but I didn't see your commitment to fidelity that way. It's about honoring the vows we made years ago. Vows she broke by having an affair with another man." I said that the news of our divorce upset my in-laws. The next day, Grace told them that my mother-in-law. My father-in-law called and started shouting at me for about 20 minutes without a break. As soon as I answered the phone, my mother-in-law. My wife's voice of reason usually came through on the phone, but she was still upset. She never even betrayed you, and you're ending it after 20 years. Are you out of your mind, Adam? I told him what had happened, and I could see he was trying to keep a lid on it. He would sometimes interject with a quiet, "Really?" I finished telling him what had happened, and by the end of our conversation, he seemed a bit down. He apologized quietly and ended the call. The following week, I moved to a nearby 2-bedroom apartment. I moved into a bedroom apartment while my daughter chose to stay with my wife until she started college the following year. I thought the extra room might be useful if either of the kids wanted to stay over, despite understanding my reasons for divorcing their mother. Both children were upset with me. A few days after settling into my new place, I had a cordial phone chat with my neighbor Jack. I informed him that his wife April seemed to have. I told Jack that I didn't think he was involved in my wife's relationship with Larry Hayes, but it did seem like April might have had a hand in it, given how close she was to Grace. I couldn't help but wonder if she was also arranging something with another man. Jack muttered, "So you're saying I might be in trouble too? Does your lawyer offer group discounts? The rise of social media has pros and cons. For me, one positive aspect was that I could gather plenty of information about Larry Hayes without needing a private investigator, which saved me a lot of money. A colleague of April's had moved to our local office from Cleveland around 7 months before my marriage fell apart. He had a beautiful fiancée who was still looking for work in our city, so he frequently traveled. I went back to see her on weekends, and it seemed like he was trying to set something up with my wife for when he was in town, so he could have a warm welcome in both places. I wondered if Grace was even aware of Hayes' fiancée. That was all in the past now, except for the call I made to Hayes' fiancée soon after I received word from several sources that Larry's wedding had been called off. His fiancée expressed that he was free to be with his old lady. I think I mentioned before that his fiancée was the daughter of a very wealthy man. 2 weeks before my divorce was finalized, it was my 21st anniversary with Grace. I was really hurting, but as I sat in front of my Swanson to dinner, I felt more and more that I was making the right choice for myself. Staying married meant a lifetime of suspicion and looking for signs of her infidelity. I was sure she'd find a way to betray me. She couldn't stand losing. She saw not getting her way as a defeat that needed correcting. I took a sip of single malt and went to bed by 11. 10 to midnight. Morning. Happy anniversary to me. It's around 2. At 0, my phone rang and I realized that my future my wife was calling. I thought about transferring the call to voicemail, but I decided to answer because I was already awake and breathing heavily. I could tell she was in the middle of making love. I knew she wasn't faking it, so I stayed on the line. I listened to them for another 3 minutes, long enough to hear them finish. I wished I had a landline phone so she could hear the fun clap. All my doubts about our impending divorce disappeared at that moment. Following the advice of my lawyer, I had developed a habit of recording all conversations with my wife. I sat there, my nerves on edge, and dialed my in. I played the recording of the 3-minute conversation with my father-in-law. I made a 1-minute recording for him before ending the call. I was confident there would be no repeat performances of that unpleasant exchange in the future. Like my wife, I didn't seek solace in the company of others until after the divorce was finalized. Even then, it was over a year before I took another woman to bed. I'll admit that my social life suffered. It had been 24 years since my last date. With no intention of dating again, I hadn't kept up with I soon realized that I was out of touch with the dating world, which had changed a lot in the meantime. I was also afraid of getting hurt again. I had loved Grace deeply, and her betrayal blindsided me completely without even a warning. One noticeable change I observed since my last stint in the dating world was a shift in women's attitudes. Back then, it was typically one-sided. The man used to take the lead, choosing who to pursue, asking them out, planning the date, and even footing the bill. Nowadays, it seems like women are taking on more assertive roles in dating. Sometimes they even initiate the pursuit themselves and have opinions on how the date should unfold. They occasionally contribute financially, too. I felt like a relic trying to keep up with the pace of modern dating dynamics. In the dating scene, I saw that Grace's selfishness wasn't an exception, but part of this newfound empowerment in today's dating scene. People seem more focused on fulfilling their own desires, sometimes at the expense of their partners. I've encountered this mentality frequently, and it's a recent development that I've witnessed firsthand. I won't deny the physical sign of intimacy with a 20-year-old. The woman was quite old, and it was pretty intense at first. I thought I might have strained a couple of muscles, but once I adjusted to the physical demands, it was actually pretty good. I don't want to discredit Grace's abilities in bed at 44. She couldn't match the energy and flexibility of the young woman. I'll admit I didn't have the stamina of a young man, but I made up for it with my tongue and finger skills, which were my forte. I wasn't solely interested in younger partners. I've had experiences with women between the ages of 30 and 50. I'm open to all ages, but I usually gravitate towards women of my age with whom I feel most comfortable. After a challenging week, I met with a new client on the other side of town. I was still dressed in my business suit, so I decided to take a breather and stop by the bar of a fancy hotel restaurant. I sat on a tall stool and ordered a shot of Glenmorangie single malt. It was around 8. I got there at 000, and about an hour later, a lively group of women from a bachelorette party took over a cluster of reserved tables. They were about 20 in total and really lively. I was intrigued, so I decided to stay a while longer and enjoy the show. I ordered a meal to be served at the bar. As you might expect, the bride was in charge. She was the center of attention. She was a young woman of approximately 27 years old with long brown hair and brown eyes. I have a soft spot for long hair, so I found myself looking at her for several minutes before looking at the rest of the party. Then I noticed her counterpart, a woman of France. She looked to be around 43 years old, and she seemed to be the designated chaperone, the older guardian who was there to keep an eye on the younger guests. She was sitting with her legs crossed, and her mid-thigh-length black skirt was riding up a bit on her legs. She tried to adjust it a few times at first, but it didn't work very well. I couldn't help but smile to myself. She had nice legs, and it looked like she had a big bust. She was wearing a tight turquoise silk blouse that showed a bit of cleavage. Her alabaster skin was on show, and her outfit seemed to be aimed at a younger crowd than she usually goes for. I thought it was a great choice. Whoever picked it out and encouraged her to wear it deserves a pat on the back. The women were clearly having a great time, laughing, drinking, and enjoying the food. The band started playing and several women rose to dance with one another. This seemed to embolden other men in the bar, who gradually approached the women on the dance floor and those seated at tables, except for their chaperone. After waiting for approximately 15 minutes without anyone approaching the chaperone, I determined it was safe to approach. She had dark brown shoulder-length hair and bright green eyes, and she was also missing a wedding ring. She blushed a lovely shade of pink when I invited her to dance. She was initially hesitant, but she eventually agreed despite receiving teasing remarks from nearby women. She stood up, adjusted her skirt, and took my hand. I silently thanked my ex. My wife made me learn how to dance. The first 2 dances were lively, and I was pleasantly surprised. She leaned into me during a subsequent slow dance. Her hair carried the scent of white shoulders, which amused me as it's not typically favored by younger women. As we moved across the dance floor, we engaged in conversation. I learned her name was Abigail Russell. She was the bride's aunt and served as the group's chaperone. After thanking me for the dances, Abigail I was about to leave the dance floor after the slow dance, but I held on to her hand and invited her to join me at the bar. She initially protested, saying she needed to watch her girls, but I pointed out that she could still keep an eye on them from our vantage point at the bar. Reluctantly, she agreed, and we observed the younger women while engaging in conversation. I discovered that she was actually 49 years old and had undergone a divorce after a 16-year marriage. She shared with me that her ex-husband was a wealthy man who had replaced her with a younger wife who was 28 at the time of their marriage. Her husband, who was a wealthy man, had replaced her with a younger wife who was 28 at the time of their marriage. 5 years ago, she also said that her outfit was chosen by her niece, the bride, and that it was a bit youthful for her usual style. I told her that her outfit suited her perfectly, and that her shoes were attractive. Over the years, I had learned that women often appreciated compliments on their shoes. "This outfit?" she innocently asked. "Not at all an excuse for my directness, but you look absolutely stunning," I replied. If I had appreciated her pink blue Shirley, I was even more enamored by the deep red blush she displayed. We chatted for approximately 20 minutes, during which she observed that I wasn't wearing wedding rings and was curious about the story behind it. She seemed surprised when I mentioned that my wife had never physically cheated on me. I'm quite traditional. I told her she'd betrayed me emotionally and was planning to do so physically. I couldn't trust her anymore. You can't claim to love someone while desiring someone else sexually. She said everyone had their own boundaries. A few minutes later, she returned to the bridal party table, but she was still open when I asked her to dance again. About 25 minutes later, this time after we finished, she took my hand and guided me to the dance floor. She led me back to the table where the other women were seated, now joined by several other men. Despite the lively behavior of some of the younger women, I was pleased with how the evening went. I was surprised when Abigail asked me to be her date for the wedding in 3 weeks. I was originally planning to attend solo, but I think I'll have a better time with you, she explained. Although we've only just met, you've already made yourself at home with many of the other guests. Who will be there? It would be a huge help to me, because I really wouldn't want to be there alone looking terrible. I certainly wouldn't want you to feel that way. I'd be more than happy to go to the wedding with you, I replied. Just let me know what color you'll be wearing, and I'll choose a suit that goes with it. She leaned in and kissed my lips. Oh la la, teased, as voices from the end of the table caught my attention. I grinned, noticing Abigail's blush. Once more, I found myself enjoying her reaction, savoring the moment while not dancing. I sat with Abigail at one point, keeping a watchful eye on the bachelorette party attendees. Some of them were visibly overindulging in alcohol. As the father of a teenage girl, it was only natural for me to adopt a protective stance. My attention was suddenly drawn when I observed a young man guiding one of the girls towards the restroom. I excused myself from the table, and swiftly and discreetly intervened, arriving just in time to intercept the I stepped in before the young man could usher the girl into the men's restroom. He regarded me with contempt, evidently unimpressed by an older gentleman in formal attire. I didn't seem to strike fear into anyone at first glance. Nevertheless, I'd like to believe I'm still in decent physical condition, having enjoyed a fair share of hardships in my youth. Sometimes readiness for unexpected confrontations is necessary to do what's right, like protecting a young girl from becoming a victim. I hoped someone would intervene I'd shield my own daughter if the situation demanded it. I'd let go of my hand and back off. Old-timer snarled at me. She's old enough to handle herself if she wants to. I saw what was going on, and Abigail and the others came over to us. They helped the woman back to our table. I was ready to face the restaurant manager and other staff, worried about being told off. But they were really grateful for what I did. The manager said the police had been called and the person involved was being arrested. They said they'd probably ask me for my details and what happened, but I don't think they'll need to. Oh, and your drinks for the rest of the party are on the house, by the way. Thanks again, and come back to the table, Emily. The newbie commented on the ordeal, and she said, "Thanks for paying attention to more than just Abigail. I should have been keeping an eye out, but I was completely oblivious. I feel terrible about it." She said, "Don't blame yourself. It's easy to lose track of 15 girls in a bar if you're not a professional security guard or a dad." I reassured her. I chatted with her, laughing and joking with the other ladies at the table. I joined in with their fun until they decided to move on to another spot for the rest of their evening. They said good night, and Abigail gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. I felt happy knowing I had her contact info saved in my phone. One of the girls joked about finding a private space, and everyone laughed. When the women left the restaurant, I licked my lips, tasting Abigail's lipstick, and went back to my original spot. I was at the bar with my drink when the bartender said, "Looks like things went well for you." I laughed and said, "A bachelorette party. Give me one more drink to toast my good fortune before I bid farewell to my newfound companion." The bartender got a $20 tip for the evening. Abigail had bought a light blue dress for the wedding, so I wore my dark blue pinstriped suit, which I thought was my own form of attire. We made quite the pair and got nods of approval from several of her relatives. At the wedding, lots of people came up to me to thank me for looking after Abigail. It seemed like the bride had been telling everyone for the past 2 weeks how I was a hero and a handsome guy. What a great combo. Abigail's sister Mia came up to us before the ceremony to thank me for helping out with the bridesmaids a few weeks back and for helping my sister find a good guy. Emily is my daughter and Ethan is her fiancé. When we first met, Emily said that at least one of my parents wasn't going to be looking for dates at an elementary school by the end of the reception. By the end of the night, I felt like Abigail and I had a future together. A month later, I introduced her to my kids, and my son was quick to warm up to her. My daughter was still a bit distant though, and she was still resentful towards me for divorcing her mother, even though I hadn't cheated on her. My son though, he understood the situation. He had a serious girlfriend of his own. We had an in-depth conversation about fidelity and its importance to each of us. We had a long chat about fidelity and what it means to us. When we retired a few years later, Abigail and I celebrated our next anniversary with a cruise on the seas and oceans. We did daily intimate rituals to strengthen our bond at our stage in life. It's more about developing a connection than purely physical intimacy. All 3 of our children have since tied the knot and are thriving, blessing us with a total of 6 grandchildren. I've had occasional conversations with my ex. My ex-wife and I have stayed in touch since our divorce, mostly during our children's weddings and holiday gatherings. She's since remarried and divorced again, often blaming me for her circumstances. She tells our children that some people just don't understand what faithfulness is. Please feel free to leave a comment on how you like this story, friends.